I'm Amanda, and this is the Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Welcome to today's episode, you guys. I am so excited that you're here. This is a little stray from the normal, like talking to another quilter, but I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation. I had Gina Gallaun reach out. I hope I said her last name right. I had an author reach out to me requesting to have me consider her being on the podcast. She had just written a book, which is a compilation of different stories of women from women across the globe and the ways that they show courage in their lives. And I read the book and I loved it. And I thought, you know what? This relates to quilting and quilters and the courage it takes to share your art and to learn a new skill and to talk about the thing that you love out loud. And so I just was so excited to have Gina on the show. And the book is called Embrace Your Brave in 30 Days. Gina Gallaun traveled the globe and she traveled around the world talking to different women and the ways that they were able to show courage in their own lives and what that took for them. And at the end of each little story, which they're not any more than 2 pages, which is so great, there are journaling prompts to help you think about ways that you can incorporate that story into your life or ways you can face that maybe specific type of fear in your life. So, anyway, we just hit it off so well. We had such a great conversation spanning topics like coming from Europe and not really knowing about quilting to now needing to decide on a pattern for a wedding quilt as a gift and what step parenting looks like and how to continually face your life and your own fears and how to show up for yourself every day. So, again, I'm so excited for you. And on top of that, Gina has so generously offered a discount to listeners. So if you are listening, you love this conversation and you're curious about her book, you can go to her website, www.wavesandwords.org, and order a copy of the book. And when you use code QUILT, that's QUILT, at checkout, you'll get 20% off of her book. Ugh, so generous. So head over there, check out her website anyway, even if you're not necessarily sure about the book. I read through it. I didn't have 30 days, but I just read every single story. I read through all the prompts, and I just think that there's so much value in hearing other people's stories of courage and bravery and what it takes to step up and be an active participant in our own lives. So while you're listening, go check out Gina's website and let's just get into it. Well, Gina, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I'm
Mm,
really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. This is a meeting I've been looking forward to since we set it up. Um, I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, this is going to be so fun. So, we were just talking before, you're the first like non-quilter to be on the show. So, congratulations. No.
Thank you. I know it's a fun experiment. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
This is also my first time appearing on a quilting show. But I had some thought on why I've reached out to you. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's
That's great. We'll totally get into that. So, just so people know, you have a book called Embrace Your Brave in 30 Days, and it's a collection of real life short stories from women all over the world, and then accompanying kind of exercises to help women discover their own bravery and their own courage. So, we'll talk about that and how that came about. And I guess we can start there is, yeah, how did you come up with the idea for the book and all that?
Yeah, so exactly 3 years ago, actually, this month, I found myself in a place in life where I just felt uninspired, for my chapter ahead or just for the future. I didn't have any vision for the future or anything I was looking forward to that I felt excited about.
Mhm.
Just the sense of like, a lack of motivation, a lack of inspiration and vision. And I decided to quit my job, which was an amazing job, that I had had for 8 years, great team, and but I just felt like in my heart that the brave thing to do would be not to like take the next promotion and move up to the next level, but to just step out of that system entirely and go, well, this was a dream of mine that I had had for some time, to go on a world trip and interview women around the world on what courage had looked like in their lives,
Mm,
because I knew about myself that I feel so inspired when I hear a real person share how they felt a fear and a worry and they navigated it with personal style, and they came out on the other side. um yeah, so I thought that would be my dream, like sabbatical would be to go travel around the world and interview these women. So I did that. And I felt, in the end, I felt so inspired that I just had so much like creative energy, that I decided I want to, piece those stories together, kind of like a quilt, into like a book where people can basically do a 30-day world trip where every day they read a story from somebody in the world, whether it's Brazil or Africa or India or like Belgium,
mhm,
like a real woman, who had to face some sort of fear and like work her way through it to get to the other side of joy, or closer to the life that she wanted. And then it was also important to me not just to have a story, not just to make someone feel inspired, but to have that momentum and energy, like of inspiration, be turned into something. So I worked with these women to think of like good journaling prompts so
mhm,
that I can take my inspiration and journal through, okay, what would courage look like for me in my family life or in romance or at work, and then make actual changes.
yeah.
um yes. And through this world trip I ended up moving from one side to the world to the other side of the world, I mean from Europe to America, and that's where I first was introduced to quilting. um,
Yeah.
and I was invited, by someone to join a crafting retreat,
Mhm.
and I thought, oh my gosh, people do that here? That's like a dream vacation. You go and you work on your arts project. I'd never seen that before in my whole life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And there was a whole room of quilters and then a whole room of scrapbookers. And just
Okay.
we ended up talking a lot about these stories.
Mhm.
And that kind of made me think, I think that women who like to be creative, and quilt, they also do like, to think about, okay, what the like courage, what could it look like hearing those stories? So
Mhm.
that's why I reached out to you and I thought, let's try this fun experiment and connect these two things.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, and just, like, so brave for you to, jump from something that probably felt pretty secure and safe to stay in your job and go do something that was a dream of yours. And I think so many of us have dreams like that where it's like, well, if only I could just, you know, XYZ insert prompt here, like then we all have that dream that lives in our hearts. And so when we hear from people who actually get to do that, and like you said, real life stories. I mean, I was telling you, I was a teacher. I taught for 8 years, and there came like a choice, and it was either this school is going to let me move on and work within the master's degree I had just, you know, earned and had to finish through the pandemic and kind of see what the next chapter of teaching looked like, or I was going to leave and focus on my quilting. And I got a no at the school, and I was like, okay, well, then here's my next path. And so that kind of dream I've always had of being my own boss and being an entrepreneur is like, I get to live it now because I took that step to say, you know what? I can do something different. And
Yeah,
so I really resonated with that idea. And just hearing these stories, well, I guess reading technically, all these stories from all these women around the world, it's like, yeah, we all face things, opportunities every day where we can choose to be brave or just kind of like fall back to our behavioral patterns that keep us in these loops.
yeah.
And so yeah, I think crafting and quilting is a way to face some of that, I think. So I'm
I
really
think so too.
excited.
And by the way, that was so brave of you to do that, because even though there was like clarity, you got a
Mhm.
clear answer, which is helpful in
Right.
finding your path forward, but you could have still applied for another school. Like you could
Mhm.
have stayed within the familiar,
Yeah.
zone. Like that still is a huge thing to step out into something really unknown to you at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it was hard, but at the same time, it was time. It was just one of those things you just know when you know. And I think it can be easy to tune out those voices and just go, no, I'm gonna stay with the safe path. I'm gonna stay with
Yeah.
what's steady. But even still, it's like We think about all the time these big companies where people have these great jobs and they make good money and they've got good benefits and they feel really secure. And then the next day they got a call that they're being laid off for whatever reason. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's no other reason than just like the company's downsizing and then they're stuck. It's like
yeah.
you don't want to find yourself in that situation. Obviously, nobody does. And so I think that false narrative that having a, quote unquote secure job is what will save you because it won't.
Yes, absolutely. And there's also the other aspect to it because I was noticing in while I was in my job, I actually still had like great career opportunities. And I just could, like, when I questioned myself, okay, what's my argument for staying versus what's my argument for leaving? My argument for staying sounded like, what if I never get to, what if I never get a chance to be part of a company that's amazing again?
Mm,
But that's actually a fear motivated argument.
yeah.
Whereas my motivation for going on that world trip was like, oh my gosh, that would be so cool. That would be so inspiring.
Yeah.
That's something I wanted to do, not as opposed to something I was afraid like I would never come around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've just really noticed that when I make those fear-based decisions,
Mhm.
they can lead to something good, but usually the better outcome is not the fear-driven motivation, but because I desire something or it's based on my values or something, that usually leads to much better stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, my husband and I always talk about it as, like, are you doing making a fear choice or are you making a loving choice? And, like,
I love that.
sometimes the thing that you need to do to love yourself is to face that fear.
I learned along those lines, I learned the terms of fear bond versus love bond from a psychologist called Dr. Jim Wilder. And he said, if you build a fear bond,
Mhm,
that looks like you doing something or saying something because you're afraid that if you don't, the other
mhm.
person might respond negatively,
Yeah,
or not saying something, not doing something because of your concern about how the person will respond. That's a fear bond. And
yeah.
a love bond is when we say something or do something because we want to, and we trust that
Mm,
the relationship will be okay. And I,
mhm,
I I found that concept so powerful. And he gives this question to people to ask yourself, what would it be like me to do if I wasn't afraid right now? You know,
mhm.
to help yourself figure out how can you move like in a love like decision bond direction. And
Yeah,
I found that, yeah, it's kind of like what you're talking about with your husband.
yeah,
It's a much better approach to life.
yeah.
And it's
And it's
amazing
oh,
to
go ahead.
notice, it's amazing to notice. Like once I heard these concepts, it was amazing to notice how much of my life I was doing
Mhm,
out of like fear bonds, like picking up a call that I don't want to pick up, but just because I'm concerned they will be upset.
mhm.
Or I was really surprised to notice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Even just taking a step back and kind of starting to try to notice those things in your life can have such a powerful impact because I think we just don't think about it. We're like, well, this is just how I live my life. This is just what I do. And until you start to really take inventory of why you're motivated to do things a certain way or, yeah, pick up that phone call, but then feel like do it begrudgingly versus like
Yeah.
doing it because you want to talk to that person and you want to share your time with them.
And there's also, I actually have a story about this.
Yeah.
And eventually we'll get to quilting, but
Yes, we will.
it just came to mind as you were speaking. So on my world trip, I'm traveling with my best friend, and she meets this guy, and later in the evening she says to me, Gina, I found this man that I think you should meet. He has baggage, he's divorced, he has two kids. And then she says, but he has a great beard. Like you should meet him. Because, my friend knew what I was into.
Yeah.
And so now 3 years later, we're married. That's my husband now. And so now I have two wonderful stepchildren.
Yeah.
But this is my story. When I first stepped into this parenting role at
Mhm,
bedtime, my husband and the two kids had a very clear idea of what bedtime looks like. It's the parent reading a book to the child, and that's what my husband had always done, and that's what they all expected of me. And
mhm,
I just like, for me, at the end of the day, I was like completely new to parenting. I had never even babysitted. At the end of the
mhm,
day, I was like, my battery was at like 2% because that was so much to figure out. And like reading a book out loud in a language that's not even my language, it just took more than the 2% that I had left. And
yeah.
I just hated doing it,
Mhm,
but like they expected it. So for some time I did it, but to be honest, I hated bedtime because it
Mhm.
was just like something I hated to do. Like it took all my energy. And
Yeah.
then I came up with these funny, and this is like now looking back, so funny, just what humans do instead of solving a problem, really. Like I thought of these ways to avoid bedtime. This is all like fear motivated in a way.
Yeah.
I kind of felt jealous of my friend who I know she had an arrangement with her husband that they take turns
Mm.
during bedtime. So she only had to do it every other night. Yeah. So I tried to talk my husband into that, but he wanted to see the kids every night. So that didn't work.
Yeah.
And and then I tried to set these rule like this rule, if you're not in bed by exactly, let's say 8:30, I'm not
Mhm.
reading to you, and like the
Mhm.
strict rule, which then left them disappointed and then me disappointed that they're disappointed. And it took me a year to figure out what I'm doing here is I'm kind of doing something, the reading out loud, that I don't want to do, but it's because I think people expect it of me, and I'm scared that they would see me as a bad stepmom if I don't do it. But
Yeah.
it led to so much resentment and like begrudgingly, I was doing that.
Mhm.
And then eventually I asked myself, okay, well, what would be a way to do bedtime that would give me something and the kids something, so that there's joy from both sides.
Yeah.
And then now it's incredibly incredible like for me to say that, but I love bedtime now, and I have a different like thing that I do with each of them. Like
Mhm.
with my stepdaughter, we do a happy place exercise where we imagine some happy place and we pay attention to the colors and the textures and what does it smell like. And
Mhm.
then we invite somebody like a trusted person to come and give us a message before bedtime, like something encouraging that would calm us down. And it's beautiful every time. Like I love listening to her imagination. And
Yeah.
I go in maybe with 10% left at the end of the day, but I come back out with 15 or 20 because we figured out a way to do this in a way that like is my personal style and that
Mm.
I love to do. And
Yeah.
it was like a massive shift from this fear-based thing to a love-based thing. And really took me some time to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And, um, I also am a step parent, and so
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah, I have 2 stepsons,
Oh,
um, and it's been 16.5 years since I
wow.
came into their lives, and so, um, they're adults now and out on their own, and that's great, but yeah, just that aspect of thinking about your life of like, okay, I'm stepping into this role. I'm not the parent per se, but I have a parental role and I have the role of being an adult, and to just step in and like absorb and assume all the roles that you think you're supposed to fill um can be tricky, and I think just like you said, there were times where I was like, I would be spinning out trying to like come up with a way for me to assert my parentage and like, be like, no, I'm the boss in this situation instead of like, but that was also the kind of environment I came from where the parent was the boss, the kid had no say, and it didn't matter how much the kid protested. And that's not the environment that my husband was fostering with his kids. And so I got to learn a different perspective on parenting, and learning that ultimately is kind of what opened me up to working on myself and getting therapy and like
Wow.
finding a more loving way to exist, because I, slowly was starting to realize like, oh, this actually is fear, like fear that they're not going to respect me, or fear that they're going to take advantage of me, or fear that they're trying to, you know, as you say, pull one over on me, kind of like, oh, they're just trying to. And my husband's like, why would you assume that they're trying to like take advantage of their kids? Like they're just doing what they're not trying to be scheming and conniving. And I'm like, oh,
Yes, but you didn't have kids of your own, right? Before you,
no.
yeah,
Mm-mm.
same. So it's like if you're mostly around grown-ups,
Mhm,
kids behave so differently, and it's a
mhm.
shock to the system. Like when you first move in with them, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but oh man, I love how you use that challenge as a way to grow as a person. I mean, that's exactly
Yeah.
the opportunity. Like we would not be the same. We would not be who we are today without our beautiful stepkids.
No.
They're really good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. I didn't know this about you. That makes me
Yeah.
like you even more.
Ah, yeah. We're
Yeah.
stepmoms. Yeah, it's
Yay.
it's like, I know it's not rare, but I just feel like it is in a sense that I don't really know a lot of other step parents, and so I've kind of felt isolated in that experience, and I don't know how you felt with it,
Oh,
'cause
yeah.
it's like I don't really know a lot of other stepmoms to, like, talk to about what I'm experiencing or, I just recently was on a podcast called Breaking the Blocks, and we talked about that a little bit, and I mean, I have nothing but good things to say because it has only shown me more love, and it has only made me grow as a person, and I think that I've helped those boys grow into good people. I mean, of course, they're young and they're gonna make mistakes because we all do, and they're not making catastrophic mistakes, though, like, they're not out there, like, doing the things that their dad and I did at their ages, and, I think that is the benefit of us loving ourselves enough to go, oh, we need to like take perspective on this and realize how we're addressing our children and then loving them enough to give them the space to be who they are. And I think that that's a hardship that some parents face and especially step parents because it's like you only have so much pull in any direction and like with both of my boys like their moms are so involved still in their
Oh,
lives
yeah.
and so um I kinda also have to be careful where I tread
Yes.
because I never want them to feel like I'm trying to replace them because 'cause I'm not. I'm just an
Yes.
extra person who loves their kids unconditionally, and so,
Yeah.
um, it's just it's a tricky little
Yes.
road to navigate, but it's so beautiful, and I'm excited for you because you c
Yeah.
I'm, like, way farther down the road than you are, but,
Yeah.
you're
I'm
at
I'm
such a
getting
fun
more
age.
excited. Oh,
Yeah.
and yeah, I was just saying, listening to you, like hearing what it's like even further ahead in the journey makes me more excited.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Like theoretically, I believe, if I'm not like misquoting this, I read a statistic that actually blended families are now in America even more common than, like first, what do they call that? Like a first family.
Oh, yeah.
Um, just because, the divorce rate is 50%. So eventually, basically, the blended families become bigger in numbers. So it's actually incredibly common. But I think what I noticed is that become really good as a society to encourage moms to be real with their struggles. And when the kids have triggered them all day long, like to be
Mhm.
honest about what it feels like when you think you're going crazy. I don't think with stepmoms, even though there must be just as many stepmoms, I don't know, but definitely many, it's still a little bit like, ooh, if you are real about the exact same experience, just that it's actually even a little bit harder because you didn't have all these endorphins released like when you first met the kid, right? You had to
Yeah.
actually work on what, but it's so easy to to then think of that woman as like the evil stepmom.
Mhm.
So I actually think that stepmoms are a bit in a harder position, um, like when
Yeah.
they face challenging emotions, it's way riskier to be real about them. Like
Right.
it can hurt people much faster. So who do you process with? Like how do you grow? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting. And thankfully, obviously I've got such a great relationship with my husband. Not obviously, but I do because we've made our communication and our honesty with each other is like the center pillar of our relationship. And so, you
nice.
know, we've had some strong strong discussions, like, I
I
don't
bet.
say we fight because we don't really fight, but we've had some strong discussions through the years about parenting specifically and about, how to approach things with the boys and hearing each other's perspectives, and, sometimes I think being a step parent, it's like I'm not and maybe you feel the same way, but I think as a parent, you wanna see your kids as, like, perfect, and they are.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're all perfectly made exactly how we're supposed to be, and, but that can also blind parents, I think,
Oh, totally.
to their kids' patterns and behaviors, and
Yes.
so being uniquely like, just a little on the outside of that is, like, that's where and for us that some things would kinda come up and I'd see things and he'd be like, "Oh, no, that's not happening." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yes, it is." We kinda have our back and forth about it, but ultimately we'd come to a consensus and we could come together and address things that were actual problems, and sometimes it was just me, my own stuff, my own anxiety or my own fears being triggered, but because I felt safe to bring that to him, like 'cause he loves them, but he also loves me, and I love them and him, and so it's like we all want to work together to create a harmonious environment. And so
That
it
is
just gets better
beautiful.
with time.
Yes, yes. I mean, congratulations, honestly, to where you have made it as a family. Because, to start out, like you hear all these statistics about blended families, divorce
Mhm.
rate 75%, because, it is rough. And
Yeah.
but then, I read that after like 5 to 7 years, that I don't know if they're like, I don't know what it was exactly, but they're actually really strong at that point, because
Mhm.
basically it gets better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that you've built this beautiful marriage with the additional challenges of, from the very beginning, you're raising kids together, right? And you have other
Yeah.
parties involved. That is a great achievement, and that must have involved courage, to face your own like triggers, and I mean, so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, honestly, it yeah, it did it does. It takes bravery, it takes courage to face yourself in a way to ask ask yourself those hard questions and dig into your why, I think again back to that kind of default way of existing is if you never question your behaviors or why you do things a certain way or like why you feel a certain way about someone else's behavior, like you won't discover anything about yourself really, like you won't learn about yourself and who you are. And I think ultimately that's kind of the biggest gift is not only do I get to like love these kids that are just incredible and go out in the world and like any feedback we've gotten from people from school, from just like people that have met them that we, meet and run across have not like all they say is good things, So
yeah.
it's like if they can go out of our house away from us and go be good humans, like that's all we can ask for, you know?
Man, that's a big success. Yes,
Yeah.
it
So
really it really sounds like you've been a mutual like blessing, or I don't know if there's a better word, but that they've had you grow, and
yeah.
you've had the chance to like give good things to them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I hope and yeah, they've given me so much and just the ability to have the space and have the grace to learn about myself and grow up with them because I was young. I was in my early 20s when I met their dad and started
how old were they?
they were um 6, like almost 7 and then like 3.
Okay, wow, cool.
So young.
Yeah, but that's quite something too. Like, that really meant you had to rise to the challenge
Yeah.
like fast. Yeah, in your
Yeah.
20s. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's been interesting. But yeah, it's exciting to hear that, you're finding your rhythms with the kids and like
yeah,
you're able to address that idea that like what can I do to show you that I care about you in this sense of like how do we get you into a peaceful state for bedtime, and that's kind of
yeah,
what the reading of the stories does, right? But in a way that is also going to give back to you. And I think when we model that for our kids and just for the people in our lives of like this is how I take care of myself and show you how I want to be treated kind of thing.
yeah.
um, I think it just benefits everybody in our lives because then they'll know how to treat you and they'll know what to expect from you and vice versa. So I think it creates a more harmonious environment when we can all kind of say, I'm willing to do this in this way.
Yes. Yes. And then there's also just the quality of the connection,
Mhm.
because I mean, humans and kids already can tell when I'm doing something just like from a not good place. Like, they can tell
Mhm.
that my heart is not fully in it, that there's not 100% joy, to be with them. And just the quality of connection, because now when I walk out of the room, they are smiling and I am smiling. And it's this true, like, oh, I'm so glad we had this time. It's just, man, it
Yeah.
makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, and I
Yeah.
think that can be applied to, if we're going to bring it back to
Yes.
quilting,
Let's do that.
that can be applied to crafting or creating, whether you're doing it for yourself or others. What you put into it is what's going to come out of it. And so if you're putting negativity or you're feeling negative or feeling frustrated with a project or you don't really want to make it, you're doing it begrudgingly. Um, to me, when that happens to me, and I can really, I guess, only speak for myself, is I find that I struggle a lot more. I make more mistakes. I'm less careful, and I don't put my best work in. And so then the end product, I'm like, ugh, I don't even like that. But it's like ultimately because of my attitude during the creation of that item. And so I don't know
Yeah.
Anybody talked about that with you as you were
Yes,
interviewing
I
people?
that's okay, let me think about if they talked about that, but it just made me think of something a friend just shared with me.
Mhm.
Um, a bit of a different situation, but the same idea. So she's in a job she doesn't like, and she's applying for different jobs. And when you put an application together, in a way, it's like art because you're crafting words, right, to write the cover letter, and you're putting pieces together in your resume to make it look good. And she had sent 66 applications with like no success,
Wow.
and we're talking, and she says, well, I do it after work. I'm already exhausted, right? I hate my job, but I'm forcing myself to put that application out because I'm so
Mm.
unhappy with my situation. So those applications really came from a place of not a good energy, like some like
Mhm.
forcing myself, pushing through, but
Yeah.
there's no like connection, no positive anything in it. And so she changed her approach to, instead of every evening forcing yourself to send an application after work, she's taking Saturdays off to just relax. And then Sunday morning, she sends one application from a good place.
Mhm.
And I mean, I have to wait for the follow-up results, but I have to tell you how it goes later. But I'm thinking
Yeah.
that it comes across in the application like it would come across in the quilt. There's,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to put it into words. Like, I don't know if it's, but somehow it comes across the place from which you started, the
Mhm.
whole project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if your intentions, she's intending to get a job, but if her frame of mind isn't aligned with the feeling of wanting that job, then the impact is going to be that maybe her cover letter is kind of comes across snippy or short or too dry
Yes.
or it's like not that you have to put an exclamation mark at the end of every single sentence like people expect women in business to do so we don't come across rude, but just that sense of if you're not in the right headspace sort of like I'm
No
done with this.
capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like your 2% battery, right? If you're like in a space that's supposed to be joyful or supposed to be connecting and you're bringing a crappy attitude
Yeah.
essentially, right? Like it's not going to go well. And so, but
Yes. 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 Okay. Now, I know exactly which story to
okay.
share with you,
Okay.
because this was at the end of my trip, and I had asked women just this open-ended question, what has courage looked like in your life, or what have you needed courage for? And I heard these crazy stories, like from Sheena from Ireland. She has traveled like 30 countries by bike and like exotic places like Uzbekistan,
Mm,
and
yeah.
then this other lady canceled her wedding like 2 weeks before the date, and
Oh my
big
gosh.
stories like moving abroad, quitting a job. And then towards the end of the trip, I talked to this one lady, and she says, "You know what? I've moved abroad. I have chosen a career that's actually kind of dangerous, but none of those have required the most courage of me. Like, what really is the scariest out of all for me is like when I have a day where I'm just either I'm maybe sick or I'm just so overwhelmed with everything that's going on in my professional and personal life. And I know deep down what my body and what my brain needs is a day off, where I
Hmm.
sit on the couch and I just watch, let's say, Hallmark all day. That is
Hmm.
what I really need. But that requires the most courage of me to actually be brave enough to take that day off, and to believe or to say to myself, nobody's gonna die if I
Yeah.
take a day because I need it. Um, so it kind
Yeah.
of goes along that idea of pushing through versus being
Hmm.
brave enough to take a break, to take a pause, uh, you know,
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
restore my capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that works in all senses, right? Whether it's your hobby or your day job. Recognizing that in yourself, I think is important because yeah, it's like that burnout is so insidious. Like it kind of creeps in when you're not expecting it because you think, oh, I gotta keep pushing, I gotta keep pushing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What 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 have you found works best for you when you're working on a quilt and you're hitting like a moment of either frustration, like you just can't get that thing, to go the way you want it?
Hmm.
Um, I guess it could be frustration, or it could just be such exhaustion.
Hmm.
Like, what have you found works best when you hit that point, like a wall with your quilt?
I usually just have to set it aside and either just make something else to kind of clear out my creative energy. Just and it could just be as simple as like sewing some random scraps together and making like a random patch of fabric that doesn't really have a purpose besides just to sew and get it out of my system and work with fabrics that I like or that I just want to keep looking at. Or just to set it down and walk away and just, yeah, do something else entirely, not even so, just shut off my machine, turn off the lights in that room, and just go do something else, whether it's, watch a show with my husband or go on a hike or go to a movie or just do something completely different so my brain can do something else and focus on something else. Because yeah, if I
Fascinating.
keep at it, I just get more and more frustrated and keep making mistakes. So yeah, I just entirely stepping away sometimes is what I need to do.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets
Huh.
really frustrating sometimes, but
Yes, I bet.
yeah. So as far as your trip goes, because we haven't like we've talked about your trip and obviously you went around the world talking to women, but how did you decide where to go?
So I thought about where do I have connections, you know. Um, so I worked in this fintech startup and we had over 89 nationalities working there, and
Oh.
some of those people had moved on or they were back in their country. So I part of it was organizing the trip to go to places where I know there are fascinating women there and it
Mhm.
would be cool to get a chance to talk to them. Um, and then and then also I was flexible to change my plans, when like life kind of met me halfway because it was like halfway through the trip that, I met my now husband and we
Mhm.
were like, I continued traveling, but we were talking like on the phone. And at one point I realized it became more interesting to me to hear how he thinks about this topic and this topic than to even see the new place.
Right.
Um, so then actually I changed my plans, to travel to all these other places and instead said, let's give love a chance, which actually took courage because I had been
Mhm.
in like a first marriage in my 20s that didn't work out. So, to give
Mm.
it another chance, then at that point felt like actually the braver thing to do than continuing to travel. Um, so then I gave it a chance and went back to Colorado where I now live and where he lived with the kids to say,
Okay.
I'm going to give this, 3 months. I'm going to get my Airbnb and just see like what happens. Like,
Yeah.
when I meet the kids, maybe they hate me, right? Or like,
Yeah.
or maybe his family hates me. Like, let's just see what happens.
Mhm.
And then what I actually did was in those 3 months, I kind of finished my interviews literally on Zoom, and I said,
Mm.
hey, so I talked to some of the women on Zoom too. So it was like half in person, half on Zoom. But I'm really glad I did that and I was flexible that way because it worked out well.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
and that's by the way, that when I went back to Colorado, that was the first time I saw a quilt in real life, and I was, I think, 32.
Wow.
Yes, because
Okay.
yeah. So I grew up in Germany until I was 21. I don't remember ever seeing a real quilt like in real life. I'm sure they exist, but uh, they cannot be as common. Basically, I never saw one.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Spain. I never saw one there. And then I moved to Estonia. And Estonia is actually right under Finland. It's
Mhm.
like cold half of the year. It's Scandinavia. Like you would expect if quilts should be anywhere, that would be a perfect place.
Right.
But I also never saw a quilt there. So
Interesting.
yeah, I Googled this later. And well, the internet says that quilting is most common in the UK, in Europe.
Mhm.
Um, which, yeah. But not in the places I lived. So when I then actually moved here, it was my husband's grandmother. When I first went into her, like visited her house. Her house is like quilting wonderland because she has this blew my mind. She has quilts for every season. Like she has Christmas quilts and
Mhm.
like Thanksgiving quilts. I'd never seen anything like that. And then of every size and shape,
Mhm.
Halloween quilts. And then one time we're sitting on the couch talking and she offers me a quilt to be comfortable. And she says, my great great grandmother made this quilt. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So that would be my husband's like great 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 grandmother. And
Mhm.
and that quilt still looked good. Like I never would have thought. I don't know how
Yeah.
that's even possible that they preserved like so well and it had been
Mhm.
used by the family for decades. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that just blew my mind. And just yeah. And then she offered, that grandmother offered to make us a wedding quilt. Um,
Oh.
and actually she said that we should choose the pattern,
Mhm.
so that she knows she makes something for us that we really love.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's been a year and we haven't been able to make this decision because it seems like such a big deal. Like it seems like the wedding quilt is the most important quilt anybody's ever gonna make for me. So I
Yeah.
don't know how to choose the pattern. I know you've made some wedding quilts.
Mhm.
How do you think, what's the best way to choose a good design for a wedding quilt?
Yeah, I think what ends up overriding everything is the personal aesthetic of the couple. So, like, are you more traditional? Like, is your home, like, what is it going to look like in your home? And so, I think sometimes there's a pattern that's called the double wedding ring quilt, and that was
Oh,
traditionally the quilt that was made as a wedding
oh,
gift. But it's tedious because it's a lot of small ish, like about 2-inch pieces that are cut and sewn into these concentric rings. And so they kind of
wow.
cross over each other over the whole quilt. And there's more modern ways to approach it. And people have done different versions and more modern iterations of that pattern. But um the ones I've made have been some of them have been pretty traditional and simple, but there's been some where it's been more modern and more kind of intricate in that sense. Um, but yeah, like what is it gonna look like in your home, and does it add to the feel that you want your home to have? And that's ultimately kind of where the decision comes from. And so I actually made one, I think it was last year or a year, 2 years ago. I don't remember, but it was for this couple that the mom was having it made, and we worked together to find a pattern, and it was a more modern kind of modern traditionalist. It was a star block, but then it kind of echoed out and had different layers of colors, and she wanted Garden of the Gods, from
Oh,
as the inspiration for the colors. And so we did these really yummy oranges and kind of tangerines um and then some greens, and then she had this print that she wanted on the backside, and I did incorporate it into the front side of kumquats, and they were kind of the same color palette of the oranges and greens, and with a light blue background as like kind of the sky, because the sky is always so blue there unless it's cloudy. But
oh, yeah, which doesn't happen too often.
no, no,
No.
right? And so because that place was so near and dear to them, that became the inspiration, and the stars were something that she was like, I want something that's kind of timeless, but a little more modern, that is gonna, you know,
Oh,
be an
I love
heirloom
that.
essentially. So,
Man, that just gave me an idea.
oh, good.
And it's, oh, that quilt you made sounds so beautiful. Do you have those photos on your Instagram? I
I
really want to go
do.
after. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna scroll all the way down.
It's on my business page on Sweet Pea Design Company,
Okay.
that Instagram page, it's on there, and yeah, you'll see it. I think it's pretty far down there, but if I can find it for you, um,
Oh,
sooner, I'll send you.
that
But
sounds. Yes, I look at that. That sounds beautiful.
yeah, it turned out really beautiful, and the pattern was it's not hard, it's just a lot of pieces because she wanted the bed size, she wanted it to be big, and so,
Yes.
um,
How long did it take you to make that wedding quilt?
mm, it took me probably 25 hours of labor to put the top together, and then probably another 4 or 5 hours to quilt it. But I have a long arm machine, so I just load it on there and let the computer do the work. But and then another probably 2 hours to put the binding on at the end. And then she had me embroider a label to put on the back with the couple's name and their wedding date.
Wow.
Um, which I strongly recommend requesting or getting labels put onto your quilts, one, so you know when it was made and who made it, because that's
Yeah.
been um if you dig into like any historical quilting kind of information, like so many old quilts don't have labels. And so they're trying to identify these quilts by the types of fabrics used and when that type of fabric was popular. And your husband's great
Wow.
great great grandmother made that quilt. It's like who else would know that except for his grandma.
You're right.
And so having labels is really important for the historical nature of quilts, because if it's an heirloom, especially wedding quilts, they get passed down or kept in the family, and sometimes they end up in thrift stores, and we want to know who made them. So
That's some good advice. Oh yeah. I,
anyway,
I just got this idea.
Mhm.
as you're talking. Well, I went through all these different kinds of what could I do. At one point, I was even like, should I use my wedding dress because I want to turn it into something like, should we use pieces of the wedding dress to be on there?
Yeah.
But then I thought that's not actually like, it doesn't feel comfortable because there's these little, glitter pieces on my
Mhm.
wedding. Um, but have you ever turned a wedding dress into something like a quilt, or have you ever
Mhm.
used? Really? Okay. Was that for a wedding quilt, or like how have you
Kind of,
used it?
yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah, just as like a memory, like we got married, here's our a dress on a tuxedo.
Huh.
Can you incorporate this into a quilt? And usually when it comes down to using dress fabric or something like that, it can be harder to do patterns that have like seams on the bias because they don't really stretch, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
kind of what you need in quilting cotton is that stretch to make things kind of align and work out. But it's okay. It comes together okay. And yeah, it was just more of like a commemorative, like, I'm not gonna keep my wedding dress around because that's a waste of closet space and I'm never gonna wear it again kind of thing, but I don't want to get
Yeah.
rid of it per se. And so turning it into a quilt and working around sometimes the beaded pieces or sequins or whatever, trying to add those on after the fact or even just quilting around them, incorporating them, but not allowing the quilting to go through those spots is kind of how I've
Okay.
dealt with that. And so I've also had um, a repeat client. She's come to me, I think three different times. She sent me a bridesmaid's dress and has me use it in a baby quilt for the baby of the couple whose wedding she was in. And so that was her dress in their wedding. And then she has me incorporate it into a baby quilt.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
that's been another kind of aspect of that. That's been like such a fun thing. 'Cause then it's like, here's a memory. I'm never gonna wear that dress again, again, because like who
Yeah.
wears bridesmaids dresses for a second time? But um, and then that baby gets to have a piece of that kind of friendship history. So that's kind of cool.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I have. I'm kind of curious what you did with your wedding dress now. Um.
Mine is still in the
Yeah.
closet.
Yes. So are you keeping it for like a future generations, or like what's your thought?
No, I just can't. I've just been honestly so lazy that I haven't taken it to get preserved and like boxed up. Also half of me wants to just sell it because I don't have daughters. I have a younger sister who isn't married yet, but our styles are so different. Like she would never wear that dress in a million years,
Yeah. Yeah.
Not because she dislikes it per se, it's just not her style. And so
Yeah.
it's very like it's strapless, it's satin, it's like full ball gown, the train is completely beaded. It has a drop waist beaded belt all around the waistline and it's gorgeous. And so that's the
Oh.
other thing is like every time I see it in that closet, I'm like, my dress, I love it so
Yeah.
much. And so
I I had this idea, and I've kind of hired, not hired, but asked, my husband's grandma, who's so good at with sewing machines, like not just quilts, but she can do anything. So
yeah.
my idea is I want to kind of cut the top off,
Hmm.
um, so that I could wear just the top of my wedding dress with a pair of jeans, on our anniversary for
Yeah.
however long I can pull that off, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think that would be fun because that way I could rewear it. I would
Hmm.
never wear like the full dress again, but with jeans, just
Right.
the top could be really cool. Um,
Yeah.
so we're gonna try and do that. And I've been wondering what to do with the rest of the fabric.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think I would do a quilt. But as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, that theme of like memories that are important for the couple. I
Hmm.
was just imagining. So my husband and I, we got engaged in Paris, which I know is not your
Oh,
favorite city.
no.
I have,
I like it. I like it. I don't want anybody to like hate me for not loving it, but I like it.
oh my gosh, I can tell you when we got engaged right in front of the Eiffel Tower, like
Mm.
as my husband is going down on one knee, there are people at the Eiffel Tower that they try and sell little plastic flashing like Eiffel Towers to
Yes.
tourists.
Yes.
And there's this guy who sees his opportunity, right? Because this couple that's getting engaged in front of the Eiffel Tower, they will want my plastic flashing thing. And like my sister who was there, she was literally holding him back not to interrupt the whole thing. And then as soon as I say yes, he kind of jumps forward. Like there wasn't even a second in between me saying yes. And he jumps into the scene and holds up and he says, "Do you want this? This is for your memories, And we're like, okay. And we bought it. And we thought we got it good deal for like 20 euros. But then later we walked around the Eiffel Tower, we saw 20 other people selling the exact same thing, all
Oh
for
yeah.
10 euros. So, but because of that, we have this little plastic Eiffel Tower in our bedroom. And I was just
Yeah.
thinking, what if there was an Eiffel Tower on the quilt? Um, that would be a
Hmm.
fun memory, of how it
Yeah.
started. I don't know
Yeah.
how hard that would be, but it would make it would bring me joy to see it. And it's kind of, how it started.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. Yeah, I think I think there's in some circles of quilting, there's like the expectation that a wedding quilt or a gifted quilt has to be a certain way or there's very traditional perspectives, but I think because I've made all sorts of quilts and I'm making them for people out of, their ideas. They say I want this and I want this and I want this and finding ways to incorporate what they love and what they want on their quilt for their own memories. I think that's more special than just making like, well, this is just what you get when you get married. It's like, but if everybody gets that, it's not special. Like I want my
That's
own
true.
quilt. I want my own memories. And I think, there's lots of ways that an Eiffel Tower could be incorporated, whether it's a
Oh,
paper piece block or it's applique or, there's lots of different ways. And
oh, now I feel excited.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it could be cool to like use your wedding dress to create that Eiffel Tower on top of or in addition to the rest of the quilts,
Nice.
just as that memory if you're not going to use the skirt part.
Oh, well, thanks for helping me figure it out.
Yeah, of course. That's what I'm here for. I eat, breathe, sleep, think, dream quilting. So,
Oh man. Do you have a wedding quilt too?
um, no,
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
no. I think
Yeah.
I wasn't quilting
Yeah.
yet when we got married. Nobody really in my family was. My mom's sewn her whole life essentially, but she wasn't quilting yet. And so um this one kind of pointing that I'm pointing to that's on the
Yeah.
shelf above me, that was made for me by my mom as my graduation gift for graduating from my master's degree. Um and I have a couple other quilts from her that she just kind of has made. Um, because she did start quilting before I did. She started about a year and a half before I did, but we both got really, really into it in like the 2017, 2018 time frame. And so yeah, no, I don't have a wedding quilt. I have a
Huh.
quilt that I've made for my husband, and I have several quilts, obviously, that I've made for myself. But
Maybe at one point there will be an anniversary,
yeah,
quilt that captures a good memory
yeah, yeah,
from your marriage.
yeah.
Huh.
And we got married in Las Vegas, and so we had
Elvis.
kind of yeah, yeah, we had
On the quilt.
Elvis
Oh,
in
fun.
our wedding. I mean, he didn't officiate because at the we went to the Graceland wedding chapel, which is it's Elvis themed, but it has like a nicer interior that was just like a little more softer, not like the glaring Vegas kind of like whatever. Cause like my whole family still came. We didn't just elope. Like my
Oh
whole
yeah.
family came. His mom lived in Vegas at the time, so she was there, and his dad came all the way from Florida. I had never met him until our wedding day, which was so
Wow.
wild, but yeah.
That is
Um,
wild.
yeah. So anyway, but yeah, it would be kind of fun to incorporate that kind of concept into a future anniversary quilt. I don't know.
That would be fun.
We're coming up on, well, we just had our 16th anniversary, or not 16th, sorry. We've been together for 16 years, but we had our 13th anniversary this
Okay.
year.
All
So,
right.
yeah,
So it could be a 15th or 20th, of course, would sound amazing, but it's
I
kind of
know.
far away.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, do I want
Yeah,
to wait that long? Probably not. But
exactly. Probably
yeah.
not.
So, anyway, yeah, it is kind of something I think about because I'm like making wedding quilts for people and like helping make wedding quilts for, friends in our friend group and baby quilts and all these things. And I'm like, oh, I don't have a wedding quilt, but it's okay. Like, I don't ever feel like I'm not ever like, oh, I wish somebody would just make me, or I wish I would just make I think because I have so many quilts and I've made so many quilts, like I've now made my boys' quilts, like some I just made them, they didn't know they were happening and they were just like an early gift of like in the early days of my quilting. But then my oldest, he very specifically wanted this cuddle backing. And so I made a quilt to fit the backing. And I'm like, I can make you a bigger quilt because it's not that it's not that big because the backing piece wasn't that big. And so I was like, I had to make the quilt top to fit the backing. And he was like, no, it's perfect. I don't, I'm like, seriously, if you, at any point, if you want a larger quilt, just let me know. He's like, no. And then our youngest, he graduated high school last year in 2023. And I had started making him a graduation quilt and I just barely finished it. It took me
Uh,
a long
wow.
time, but it's also a lot bigger and it was a lot more like detailed than his brother's quilt. And so, um, anyway, so they have some
Oh,
more meaningful quilts now, but
you
anyway.
know, my husband, he got a quilt for going to college, for going away to college, and it has a star pattern on it. He got that from his grandma. And now he has a son of his own. And that son actually wanted to have that quilt with the star pattern up on his wall. So it's like that quilt, the graduation or college
Yeah.
quilt, that's been passed down and it's still
Mhm,
bringing the next generation joy. It's just amazing how these pieces, I I think that's unlike other art.
mhm,
Um, just the way they're passed down to generations and the storytelling and the meaning.
mhm.
So I love that you made those. Who knows where they will end up in like, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
know, and I think that's the fun part is, like, now, like, my part of the story is over and now it's theirs, and so then
yeah,
they get to continue the part of, their part of the story of that quilt and where it ends up or who ends up with it. It's like, who knows? And it's kind of exciting to think about, and I did tell them, I'm like, "If at any point you do not want your quilts, give them back to me. Like, do not get
yeah.
rid of them. Do not thrift them. Give them back to me." And they were like, "Okay, we're not getting rid of our quilts." I'm like, "I'm just saying, do not take it to the thrift store." They're like, "We won't,
Okay.
we won't, we won't."
You made that clear. I'm
Yeah,
glad.
because I think that happens in families. They like, you know, people pass away and children or grandchildren are cleaning out houses or even siblings if they didn't have their own kids, like, and then they don't know what to, they're like, "Does anybody want this?" And maybe nobody has the connection or they didn't know the story. And so I think that's another thing is like being this can connect back to bravery. So
Yeah,
or
go ahead.
courage. I think as women, we tend to kind of downplay the things that we do. And I think it's a societal thing. And so when there's a quilter in the family, a lot of times people don't even know, like, "Oh my gosh, my grandma quilts. I had no idea," or like, because it's just like, "Oh, that's just women's work. It's just something we do, busy work. It's not that important." And when in reality, it's incredibly important. It's your family's history. It's something that it's art, it's usable, functional art, and it's comfort and it's belonging and that kind of notion that women shouldn't talk about themselves or that we should stay quiet behind the scenes and not be so braggy. Um, I just got so much joy. I don't know if you heard it or saw anything about it, but Kamala Harris was on the Call Her Daddy podcast.
I did not see
I
that.
Yeah, it was so great. I loved the interview and but she said something, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was like, "Oh, she's not humble, whatever." Tried to call her out for not being humble and Kamala's response to Alex on that interview on Call Her Daddy was, first of all, we're not aspiring to be humble. And I was like, yes, thank you. Okay. Like that's the energy we need. Like that idea that women have to be demure and humble and quiet and reserved. It's like, no, we deserve to live out loud. And if talking about the things that you do that bring you joy is you living out loud, then like absolutely do it. Like tell everybody. I tell everybody that I'm a quilter. I tell
Nice.
everybody. Even if I don't want to make them a quilt specifically, I still talk about it because I worked really hard to learn these skills and I've put ton a ton of time into it. And I can tell you those grandmas and those great grandmas and those great 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 grandmas put even more time in because they had to sew everything by hand.
Yeah, yeah.
And so to just like dismiss it as like, oh, it's just a quilt that's been in the family. It's like you have no clue what you're getting rid of.
Yeah, the amount of skill and thought that went into that.
Yeah.
Um, Wow. I love how you talk about that. Um, that just brings to mind actually a story this lady from Italy
Mhm.
told me when I was interviewing her, and it kind of matches. Um, so she talked about what required the most courage of her was to own her skills and own her
Yes.
strengths. She
Yes.
was talking specifically about the workplace, but she was saying how just recently she had been offered a new position, you know.
Mhm.
So let's say her boss says, "Hey, we think you could do this job," and her response was like, "Oh, I hope I can do that well. Like, I hope I can live up to the expectations." And then afterwards, she thought, "Man, what if I would have said, think I could do that well because I have this skill and I've worked on this, and
Yeah.
this. Like, what if I would have owned it?" And she
Yeah.
like, but there was something there that made that so scary for her, to just own her strengths. And
Yeah.
so, what she did to kind of navigate through that fear in a fun and playful way is she
Mhm.
started a game with a friend where every time they talk, they list 5 things that they are, really good at, and they call it like I'm damn good at,
Yeah.
that's the game. But that way kind of they get their own brains used to just saying out loud and owning
Yeah.
something they're good at. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, but I love how you because we I think we all know that in the work context that's a thing.
Mhm.
Like we know the studies that if there's a job ad, and there you read through it and there are some skills missing that you don't have, man, go ahead and apply anyway. And
Yeah.
women don't. But it's fascinating to think about that in the family context
Mhm.
too.
Yeah.
Um, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's worth speaking up. And I think too, and this could be part of it, and I acknowledge that sometimes it's the case for me, just depending, but like discerning on whether or not to talk about it, like being really proud of it and being okay with talking about it and not feeling like, oh, it's nothing, it's silly. Like having pride in it, but also knowing when to talk about it and when to maybe like not, because the person that is in the conversation is one that will ask you for things that you don't want to do or that you're going to say no to. I think is perfectly reasonable as well, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes we have these sewing skills, and then people have audacious requests and I'm like, do you hear yourself right now, like, no, I'm not going to do that for you. Like, you have no idea how much work that would be. And as far as like requests that come through my Etsy shop and people who just don't know, it's like I can have that conversation and say, that's way beyond my skill level, or I could do that. However, because of the labor involved, it would be approximately this much money. They're like, never mind. And I'm like, that's what I thought. Nobody wants to pay $6,000 for a quilt, which I get. If you can learn the skill and do it yourself, I'm so strongly encourage that for people, especially when it's like comes to highly detailed and very intricate and very specific designs. But if it's just making a standard pattern that I can follow and cut out the pieces and just sew it together, like, great, I can do that. One type of sewing does not equal the other in that sense, but so I guess I can understand the argument of people not speaking up in that sense, but I think overall, if your entire family doesn't know where a quilt came from as it was handed down through generations, like, that makes me sad because that
Yeah,
tells me that that person or the people in that family didn't find that valuable and didn't
yeah,
understand why it's valuable, because it is valuable regardless of their opinion or their ignorance
totally.
of it. So that's why I say label your quilts and
Yes. Oh man. Yeah.
tell the story of your quilt. Where did it come from? Make sure that if you're gifting somebody a quilt, they know that it came from you and that, it's like it's just so important historical, because quilting came from a storytelling place, not just to keep warm. I mean, absolutely, yes, but it's like, what's the story behind the fabrics in that quilt and where they were sourced and how that family used that quilt to weather the storms of winter or down economic times, and they needed to be resourceful, and every quilt has a story of and
That's
of
what I love about
courage.
quilting.
Yeah.
Yes. I googled this out of curiosity before our recording.
Mhm.
In Europe, what's the oldest quilt and what's the story? And
Yeah.
I wrote it down because I thought it was so cool. It's called the Tristan quilt, and it was made in the late 14th century. So that's like
Oh,
600 years ago in
yeah.
Sicily, in Italy. And it's the one of the oldest surviving European bed quilts. So actually used as like on a bed. And
Uh-huh.
it features scenes from the legend of Tristan and Isolde. I don't know how
Oh,
to
yeah.
pronounce it, but it's totally a storytelling quilt. That
Yeah.
was like one of the oldest surviving ones, was telling a
Oh,
story. So it's almost like, 600 years ago, that was the point, was to tell a story with it. Like, why would we not now tell the story of the quilt, we're making? That seems
yeah.
to be completely connected and important.
Yeah. Every quilt has a story, and whether it's a specific story like Tristan and Isolde, or it's just a story of a mom showing love to her daughter, or again, same with this quilt up here, like
When we started the recording, I saw that quilt in the back,
mhm.
and I had no idea that it's really the story of your mom's support and love for you. That is
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, just like imagine just buying a blanket from Walmart and wrapping yourself in that versus wrapping yourself in that beautiful quilt, that
Yeah.
is all about your mom supporting and loving you. That's like a
Mhm.
night and day difference
Yeah. It
in
means
life
so much
quality.
more, right? And
Yes.
now you know the story of my quilts, and like my husband and my boys, they know the story of those quilts because I don't let a quilt enter our home unless they know why I made it, and they might roll their eyes and be like, "Wow, that's really cool." But then they know and they're like, "Hey, isn't that the quilt you made for XYZ?" Like they know and they remember, and like that to me is like good. I'm glad somebody knows the story of these quilts. And
Yeah.
so anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, who would ever want to get rid of that quilt? I mean, after having heard that story, yeah, that
Yeah.
stays in the family.
Like bury them with me. I'm like, if
Yes.
nobody wants them when I die, then bury me with them. Like I that's all I can ask.
They're going to be stuffing quilts in that coffin,
Like
barely
don't
able to
put
close it.
dirt, just cover me in quilts.
I love that.
So
I love that.
no, I want
Oh,
them to go on and be cherished. But anyway,
mm.
yeah. So I guess, yeah, like as a European coming to America and then meeting somebody who has quilts in their life, but then also maybe venturing out and seeing them more presently, like did that change your perspective of American culture, or did it change your perspective of your own culture?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, first of all, coming to America before even seeing quilts like in real life, even when I traveled here maybe 10 years ago, the first time I came, I did notice just even the crafting stores being so amazing.
Yeah.
All the stuff that you could buy there that I had never seen. Um, so I don't know why that is, but I do have the impression that there's more of a crafting culture, or maybe it's different. I don't know, but even the fact that I had never heard of crafting retreats like in my life, and here that's not abnormal, that's totally something people do. I would be really curious to know what it is, like why that's more common here.
Yeah.
Um, I really enjoy it. I love the community aspect, of
Mhm.
like crafting retreats, people coming together to make art, and quilting also like a whole community thing.
Yeah.
Um, and what it makes me think about is one thing I noticed when I interviewed all these women, like one very like common theme across all the countries is that we can be braver, or it's easier for us to think of a creative,
Mhm.
like cool way to navigate something scary if we have people around us that we can brainstorm with,
Mhm.
that are also interested in figuring out, okay, what would be like a love-based response to this. So basically, the more you have people like that in your life, the easier it becomes to take courageous step, like in your work, everywhere. And I'm just noticing with quilting and crafting how much that is a community thing where
Yeah.
people really talk. Um, that my husband's grandma, she also works in a quilt shop, like part
Mhm.
time. And the ladies there that she works with and does art with, I mean, they're just part of her life. They
Mhm.
come to funerals and they support her, and
Mhm.
it's so much more than just art. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and I've seen that here more than back in Europe. That might also be because I was just really busy building that one fintech company. And to be honest, I didn't have much time for hobbies.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, maybe I just happen to not be friends with the people that do crafting there. I'm sure that exists. Um, I just never ran into it. But just yeah, having moved here, I love the community aspect of it. I love how it brings people together, and it's so much about so much more than making a quilt. Like while the quilt is being made, for example, at the crafting retreat, these women are talking about their challenges, like in their personal life, and they're encouraging each other. Like there's
Yeah.
so much more to it.
Mhm.
The impact of that quilt is so much bigger than just the end result. You know?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, and I think that's why, like, guilds are so important and, like, open and accepting and affirming guilds too, like, I think one thing in American culture around quilting is that it can lean towards a very conservative group of thinkers, and a lot
interesting.
of guilds are held in churches where for some people that's not a safe space, and, so, like, my one of I am part of 2 guilds here locally. One is, a I don't wanna like, a branch of the Modern Quilt Guild. So there's a national Modern Quilt Guild, and then you can have a branch in your city, and so my local Modern Quilt Guild is great. We meet at the library, it's way more open in that sense, and I love that aspect, and it's a smaller guild, so there's not as many attending members, and there might be more that just don't come as often, and I don't even go that often because my weekends are my time with my family, um and they meet on Saturdays. But then the other guild that I go to is strictly local, and they've been around since the 80s, and they've always met in a church, and for some people that's a no-no, like they will not go to a church to meet up, and so I think that that can be a tricky part of finding a group and um, a support system within quilting if you're not of the religious ilk.
Yeah.
And so I love when I find or see that there's groups meeting outside of that or making their own groups. Like you don't even have to be part of like a normal guild. Like, quilting bees were the thing back in the day. And now because we have globalization, we've got Instagram and we've got all these different ways to connect, people have like virtual bees. And so it's a
Oh,
small group where they make the same kind of blocks and exchange them all. And, but like you're talking about the quilting bees of the past where they would all sit around the quilting frame and they'd all be working on their part of the quilt and talking and sharing stories and helping each other through the hard times in life. I think just like you said, the intention going into those quilts and the process of making that quilt is just as valuable as the end result of the quilt itself.
yeah. And that, I mean, I just remembered how it was your friends got, they basically forced you into quilting,
Yeah,
right?
they did. They sure did. Yeah. Yeah.
But I can just imagine just even having friends, getting them into the same hobby and
Mhm.
then meeting, I don't know, at home with like some chai tea and
Yeah.
some Christmas music in the back. I mean, it's such a beautiful way to connect. Um, and that,
Yeah.
I mean, and your mom and you share that too.
Mhm.
But you're right, for people who don't have their friends force them into it and don't have their moms already do it, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see how that would be a challenge to find the right community to connect to.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, that is kind of a tricky aspect, and I think that's where, like, this podcast came in for me is, like, I wanna connect to more people like me,
Mhm.
and, you know, I think that's another thing is, like, guilds are great, and they're organized, and there's things you can do and specific, classes and speakers, and there is community there, but I think sometimes too the guilds were built by women who maybe didn't necessarily have to think about a full-time job and raising their family and all the other stuff that comes with those things. And or maybe they did and they just had a different setup or maybe things weren't as hectic, schedule-wise for people in the 80s. Yeah, I don't know. I was a
Yeah.
baby. So, but um but I think the reality of today is that it's easier for people to connect online when they have the capacity to do so. Like, I
Yeah.
can sew this block when I need to sew this block. I don't have to go somewhere else and set aside even more time out of my schedule to do that. So I think the virtual aspect one opens up quilting to more people because they can connect in different ways. And two, that's where I think in-person guilds kind of miss the mark on some things is obviously they can't please everybody all the time. Nobody can do that.
Yeah.
We're not tacos, we're people. And so um the dumbest thing I've ever said,
I love
but
that. I'm gonna copy that.
um so I think there's a huge role being played in social media for quilting at this time because I think it's open to affinity groups finding each other. It's open to, like I said, people starting their own block swaps and quilting bees because they don't have to be somewhere in person
Yeah.
and they can sew at midnight in their sweats with their messy bun and after they get their kids to bed and they don't have to impress anybody in that sense. Like the only thing that matters is them sitting at their sewing machine and doing the thing that they love to do. Um,
I actually have a fun research trivia that kind of fits this.
oh yeah.
Um, because I just put this together and it's interesting. When I was collecting these stories, like from women from all over the world, like my whole goal was to gift, women with like great courage stories so that they get
Mhm.
that inspiration and they take a brave step of their own. And I actually, throughout the whole book, like in the beginning, I say, hey, like if you want to invite like a courage, I don't know, confidant, like into this
Yeah.
journey, read it together and brainstorm together. You'll go so much further. Like we know this about human connection, but I
Yeah.
actually did some research and if you're in a place in life where you don't currently have people in your life, like in person in the same city, that you could meet with to brainstorm, hey, what would it be like to be brave in this situation? If you don't have them in person, or same in like the quilting community, like if you don't have somebody in the town, right, that you live,
Mhm.
that you can meet with and quilt and you feel like you belong, actually research has found that in the absence of those people, um, people that are not in person work for the brain too to download like models. So that can actually be reading a book, you know,
Mhm.
like reading an autobiography of somebody who was brave will make my brain go, okay, how can I,
Mhm.
um, be brave in my life? But even listening to podcasts, right, of basically people who have that kind of mindset, who are thinking in the direction, will
Yeah.
already help your brain move into that direction. So I'm just thinking that your podcast, exactly for people that are, in a place where they haven't connected locally to people that belong, your podcast and like listening to your conversations will already enable their brains to start like feel encouraged to move
Yeah.
forward, make their own patterns. Maybe eventually like people in your community will connect, but it's
Yeah.
actually quite amazing from brain science. Like when you read a story, like in a book, or you listen to a podcast, how much that already helps your brain
Mhm.
if you don't have those people in town that you can do it with. It's actually amazing and hopeful that that's
Yeah.
the case. Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible. And like really that's genuinely like where I come from at this is like if you don't have a person in your city or in your town that quilts or you don't have an in-person quilty bestie like I do, if you don't have that, I want to be your friend. Like I want to be that person that encourages you to just make the damn thing or who answers questions you have about quilting or brings you somebody who can answer those questions or who can inspire you. And I was kind of feeling that, like, especially during the lockdown and stuff, it's like, "Oh, we need each other in more than just in-person ways," because sometimes there's cases where that's not safe and it's not
Yeah.
okay. Even if you love each other and it's a safe relationship, needing that, you know, crossing that divide of physical space is so important, especially in our society now and
Yeah.
how open and globalized and connected everything is. So
It's
that's
so amazing that we can do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so encouraging and then I can have people like you on who can further that talk of like find your bravery. Like we all have it in us. And some of us somehow have like maybe grew up with a more secure attachment in our, in the people who raised us. And so we don't feel as scared to um make kind of not risky in a bad sense, but like take calculated risks, like take well-informed risks, where some of us didn't necessarily have that, and so taking those risks feels very scary.
Yeah.
But hearing, like, even just like I said, reading through your book and reading these stories of all these other women and the things that they've done that to them was a brave step, it's so encouraging. It's like, yeah, I can have that hard conversation. I can speak my mind. I can, you know, live in my truth. And if it bothers anybody else, like, I mean, that's a scary part, right? Especially for people pleasers. We have a hard time feeling like we're disappointing people.
Yeah.
But the more you step out into that and the more you hear it from other people and feel like you have people you can look up to that are similar to you in similar walks of life, it's like such a gift because otherwise we'd be so isolated.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing what connections do. And what I've been thinking about recently is when you take a brave step, let's say you have a hard conversation or you quit your job or I don't know, or something smaller. Like my friend, her husband just invited her to go play disc, is it called disc golf,
Yeah.
with her. And she thought, I have no skill, right? I've never done it. And she felt this immediate like nervousness of just being embarrassed,
Mhm.
and and so she said no first, but then she thought about it and she's like, clearly it would take me a little bit of courage to do this because I've never done it. I don't like looking stupid,
Mhm.
in front of my husband, but it's also an opportunity to connect in a new way. So um she then ended up, saying yes, and it turned out to be an amazing date. That's maybe like a smaller courage step, but just like the ripple effects your courage step have.
Mhm.
um I had, I collected these stories and I put them in a book. And now I'm getting like stories from women from all over the world of how that impacted them. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like things you never would think about. Like this lady in Europe, she was 27. She is 27, and she had never gotten a driver's license, which here we cannot imagine. How did you even live?
Yeah.
But there, because of public transport, you can totally get by. Um,
Absolutely.
you can easily go to work and everything. But if you want to have the fun of going into nature on the weekends, you do
Mhm.
kind of still need a car. And she wanted that. So like she literally like as she's like studying the material and working up to her exam, she was reading these stories one every 30 days, like to prepare herself.
Yeah.
Um, and she said, "Oh man, first it felt so scary, like the merging lanes, where you have to
Mhm.
speed up and merge in. But like step by step, she's getting used to those and increasing her comfort zone. And
Yeah.
and it's funny that a story of somebody doing, let's say, quitting their job or doing something brave like in this part of the world can encourage somebody else to get their driver's license on the other side of the world. It's just really
Yeah.
cool to see those connections.
Yeah. It really is. And I think unless you're exposed to certain things, like it's hard to imagine yourself in situations that maybe you've never even thought about or to even apply like, oh, that was brave of that person. And it's like, oh, I have this fear. Yeah, like making those connections to your own stories, your own situations with maybe seemingly completely unrelated topics, but it's like that common thread is the courage. That common thread is facing a fear within yourself and we all have them, right? Fear,
Yeah.
there's healthy levels of fear, there's healthy levels of anxiety and like what you do with it is what matters, but sometimes again like just knowing that it's safe and it's okay to face that can be tricky unless you hear from somebody else like, "No, no,
Yes.
it's okay, you can do it too." It's like, "Oh, I can? I can." Like,
Yes.
"Yeah, I can actually,"
Oh my
that
gosh.
self-belief.
Can I tell you one more story? And then
Yes,
I
please.
know eventually I have to let you go.
No.
but but just as you're speaking now, that came to mind. So the first story actually in the book is of a lady who experiences bliss when she's in the mountains. Like that's
Mhm.
where, there's peace and the mountains are majestic, and she just feels actual bliss being there. And she's basically already hiked all the mountains in Europe that you can hike by
Mhm.
actually being on a trail. So you don't have to like scale a vertical wall or anything.
Yeah.
And she knew that really she would love to take it to the next level and hike those next level mountains. Um, and she needed some skills like learning how to actually scale a wall, right? So she signed herself up for the gym, like it's like a climbing gym or whatever, the local
Mhm.
climbing gym. But she noticed every time she even thought of going there, like her gut tensed up and she felt scared, and she
Yeah.
didn't end up going. Um, and like for a year, she was kind of postponing her bliss, you know, because
Yeah.
of this fear response. And then eventually she kind of sat down and thought about it. And she's like, you know what's happening as I walk into this gym? I'm telling myself, you suck at sports anyway, and you're gonna not be good at this
Mm.
because back in like school in PE classes, they did this thing where they asked two kids to pick their team, you know,
Mhm.
like pick your team. And she was always the last person to sit on the bench, like the last person to be picked.
Yeah.
And from that childhood memory, she just had this idea of like, you really suck at sports and better don't try, you know? And that
Mhm.
was kind of the fear and the shame that was coming up.
Mhm.
And so eventually, what she did to like, I think for a year, she kind of like let it be that way. And then she reached this point where she just wasn't satisfied anymore, you know, with the
Mhm.
situation. And she hired a professional to teach her, you know, like basically face her worst fear was to like actually fall and injure herself.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So this guy, like for 2 hours, she paid him money so that she would throw herself off the wall like over and over again and learn how to fall correctly.
Yeah.
And and she kind of faced that fear to make it to her bliss experience of being
Mm.
able to hike those mountains. So she's in Europe, and then somebody here in North Carolina,
Mhm.
somebody who's in her 60s, she reads that story, and there's a journaling prompt of like, um, I don't remember the exact wording. It's something like, what kind of bliss would you like to experience? But like a fear is in your way.
Yeah.
Um, and she goes like, oh man, I would love to experience the bliss of playing the piano and being in a flow of playing the piano, making beautiful
Yeah.
music. But I'm just telling myself I'm too old. I'm in my 60s. It's too late to
Yeah.
learn it. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then she journeyed like through it and she's like, what if I'm not too old, you know? And
Yeah.
then she started playing those, she started taking lessons. And I think it's been a year now. And she
Mhm.
just sent me like a piece that she played, that she recorded that was beautiful. And she
Oh,
played it for her husband while he had COVID, and like it really lifted his spirits. And oh yeah, that's just that came to mind as you were saying, like sometimes it takes us hearing or seeing somebody else do something brave to think about a completely unrelated aspect in our life and just open up those connections and be like, oh, you know,
yeah.
free us up to
Yeah.
think in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, you know, to bring that back around to quilting, it's like you might see different patterns or these beautiful things that you want to make and think, I could never make that. I could never make that. And but having the courage to just say, what if I could make that? What if I
Oh, that's a
could?
good question.
And like what new thing would I have to learn to be able to make that? And for me, that's the gift that quilting has given me is the being able and feeling safe to ask myself, well, what if? Why not?
That's beautiful.
And it doesn't always work. And maybe there's some things that I look and I go, I can admire that and I can acknowledge that it's gorgeous and beautiful. And I will never make that kind of thing. Or like, that is not the thing that I'm interested in ever trying to make. But if it's just comes to a challenge of just like something I want to make and it maybe requires a new skill or maybe challenges me to stretch a young skill, then I have to ask, well, what's the worst that could happen? I
Yeah.
make a couple sample blocks I don't like, or I end up not liking the skill and then ultimately not wanting to make the thing, then okay, there's plenty of other things that I'll come across that I want to make, or maybe further down the road, I'll go, okay, I'm ready to make that thing now and come back to it. It's like, unless it's life or death, it's not life or death.
Yes.
We're going to survive. We're going to be okay. And there's a lesson in all of it at some point. Right. And so that autonomy that we get from every time we do that and saying, instead of responding to my fear, I'm going to respond to the love I would be expressing to myself to reach out and try that thing, like learning how to play that piano. I bet you her self-love went up exponentially because she took care of a need and a want that she had to express herself that way. And same with climbing the mountains. I've got your book right here in my hand, but
Oh,
um
yeah.
um climbing those mountains, I mean, uh it's just yeah, you can baby step your way into it, and the more you practice, the easier it gets to make that choice over and over again.
I love your quilting example. And like, what if I could make that? Oh,
Mhm.
I just love that. Also, my one AirPod just died. It just
Oh,
made that
no.
doodle-doodle-doodle
Yeah.
sound. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But we can wrap this up. So, I'm so grateful that you reached out to be on the show because I do think that crafting and making the things that you wanna make and learning the skills that you wanna learn takes courage. It takes the willingness to bet on yourself and to give yourself the grace to make mistakes and try, and that's how we learn anyway, right?
I'm so glad, honestly, that I reached out to you because it was that courage that I really saw in the quilting community of like facing new art and like the fear of what if it doesn't how what if it doesn't work out, but then
Mhm.
also in their lives and how they talk about it. I thought that a conversation about courage could be really interesting for your
Yeah.
listeners. And I've just had the best time talking to you. I've
Yeah,
enjoyed this so
same.
much. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, I have too,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited to share your book. So, for the listeners, we have a coupon code. So, if you use the code QUILT at checkout to purchase your book, they can get 20% off of the book, which is
Yes,
so
that's right.
generous. Thank you so much, and I
Yeah.
encourage my listeners to go get it. I genuinely read through every single story. I'm not just saying I did. I actually did, and I really enjoyed that, like, just seeing snapshots of other women's lives around the world and feeling that connection with them and feeling seen. Like, it does matter making those decisions day by day, and it doesn't have to be every day, but just encouraging people to take those steps and in the right direction is so important and empowering. So, thank you for putting this book together and
You're welcome. It was like putting a quilt together, putting the right pieces and stories together. And
yeah.
I mean, if any of your listeners, end up reading through the stories and that impacts their art in any way, or I'd love to hear those stories. Like, definitely tell me. And I also want to let you know it's on my website, wavesandwords.org.
Okay.
That the link works. It's also on Amazon. I just don't know if I can do discount codes there. I haven't found a way to do it, but you know,
Okay.
it's on both those places.
Perfect. Well, we encourage on this show to shop from directly from the author or the designer or the fabric producer. So hopefully people will just go directly to your website to get the book, and use code QUILT at checkout to get that. We'll put it in the show notes so people can get to it directly. But in the meantime, we'll watch for the ripple effect of these stories and how people choose to express their courage. And yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being the safe, interesting person in the quilting world. Um, oh, I just love your podcast. And I haven't even done my own quilt yet, you know. And I'm actually listening to it. Yeah. So thank you,
Wow.
Amanda.
Well, thank you. That's really
Yeah.
flattering. And yeah, we'll stay connected.
Oh yeah. You bet.